There is a quiet tragedy that rarely announces itself with noise or drama. It unfolds slowly, in ordinary days, familiar faces, and repeated routines. It lives in the assumption that what is present today will remain tomorrow. Most people do not lose what matters because they rejected it, they lose it because they never truly saw it. And often, the realization comes only when absence replaces presence, when silence answers where warmth once lived. This is the moment when a man looks back and understands, too late, what he took for granted. Familiarity creates a quiet kind of blindness, the kind that does not feel like darkness at first. It feels like comfort. It feels like safety. The human psyche is wired to normalize what is repeated, to turn the extraordinary into the ordinary through constant exposure. What once stirred gratitude slowly dissolves into assumption. What once felt sacred becomes routine, and without realizing it, a person begins to look past what is most important, not because it lost value, but because the mind stopped registering its presence. At the beginning, awareness is sharp, every gesture matters, every word carries weight. The presence of another human being feels like a gift, something fragile and alive. But repetition dulls perception. The same voice, the same care, the same effort starts to blend into the background of life. The psyche says this is normal now, and in doing so, it removes the sense of wonder. This is not cruelty, it is unconsciousness. The tragedy is not that people stop loving, but that they stop seeing. The mind adapts quickly to protect itself. This adaptation once helped humans survive, but in relationships, it often becomes a slow poison. When someone shows up consistently, offers patience, understanding, and emotional safety, the ego quietly rewrites the story. It mistakes reliability for permanence. It begins to believe that what is present will always be present. Gratitude fades, not because appreciation disappeared, but because attention did. And attention is the currency of value. What we no longer attend to, we unconsciously devalue. Think of a man who is supported through his lowest moments. Someone listens when he is frustrated, believes in him when he doubts himself, stays when he is difficult to love. At first, this support feels life-saving. Over time, it becomes expected. He stops acknowledging it. He assumes strength instead of sacrifice. He interprets patience as an unlimited resource rather than a conscious choice renewed every day. In doing so, he does not see that tolerance has a limit, even when love is deep. Psychological studies on perception show that the brain filters out familiar stimuli to conserve energy. We literally see less of what we see every day. This is why people stop noticing the ticking of a clock or the hum of a fan. But when this same mechanism is applied to human connection, it creates emotional neglect without intention. The person who is always there becomes mentally invisible, not ignored out of malice but overlooked through habit. And what is overlooked begins to feel unseen on the other side. The one who gives consistently often grows quieter over time. Not because they have less to say, but because they are testing whether their absence will be noticed. This is rarely a conscious strategy, it is an emotional response. When appreciation disappears, the psyche protects itself by withdrawing. The man, still blinded by familiarity, may not notice this shift. He believes everything is fine because nothing has exploded. But relationships rarely break through noise. They break through silence. Blindness deepens when the ego enters the picture. The ego dislikes discomfort and resists self-examination. It prefers stability over truth. So when familiarity dulls awareness, the ego supports the illusion. Nothing is wrong. This is just how things are. This inner voice prevents reflection. It keeps the man from asking essential questions. Am I present? Am I listening? Am I still choosing? Or am I merely assuming? Without these questions, growth stagnates. Only when absence arrives does perception return with painful clarity. The familiar space becomes unfamiliar. The routine breaks. And suddenly, what was once invisible becomes overwhelming in memory. The mind replays moments that were dismissed, the quiet support, the unspoken sacrifices, the emotional labor that went unnoticed. Loss restores sight, but it does so mercilessly. The same brain that filtered out presence now magnifies absence. This is why regret feels so heavy. It is delayed awareness crashing into consciousness all at once. Many people describe this realization as awakening too late, but in truth, the awakening itself is not late, it is simply forced. Awareness that was avoided through comfort now emerges through pain. The psyche finally confronts its own blindness. And this confrontation, though devastating, is also transformative. It reveals a fundamental truth. Love does not disappear suddenly. It erodes quietly when it is no longer recognized. To understand this is to reclaim responsibility. Familiarity does not have to create blindness. Awareness can be trained. Attention can be renewed. Presence can be chosen again and again. But this requires humility, the willingness to admit that the mind deceives itself, that comfort can dull perception, and that what feels permanent is often sustained only by conscious care. The deepest lesson here is not about loss, but about perception. What you see determines how you treat what you have, and what you fail to see you risk losing. Not because it was weak, but because it was taken for granted. Awareness is not a feeling, it is a discipline. And those who learn to see clearly while things are still present are the ones who do not have to learn through regret. The ego has a subtle way of misreading reality, especially when it feels safe. When someone stays, forgives, adjusts, and endures, the ego quietly reshapes the meaning of that behavior. It does not see devotion or emotional strength, it sees permission. It tells a comforting lie they can handle it, they will adapt, they are not going anywhere. In this distortion, tolerance is mistaken for weakness, patience for lack of boundaries, and loyalty for dependency. This is not a conscious cruelty, but an unconscious inflation of the self. At the center of the ego is the desire to remain unchallenged. The ego resists limits because limits threaten its sense of control. When another person repeatedly absorbs discomfort without confrontation, the ego interprets silence as acceptance. It begins to test how far it can go, not in one dramatic act but in small, almost invisible ways. A dismissive tone here, a broken promise there. A moment of emotional absence justified as stress, exhaustion, or distraction. Each time tolerance is met if relief. Instead of reflection, the ego grows bolder. In many relationships, the one who tolerates is not weak at all. They are often deeply self-aware, empathetic, and invested in harmony. They understand context. They see potential. They believe in growth. But the ego on the other side does not see this inner strength. It sees a lack of consequence. And where there is no consequence, the ego feels entitled. It confuses kindness with compliance, emotional intelligence with submission. This confusion slowly erodes respect, even if affection remains. Psychological research on boundaries shows that when limits are unclear or consistently crossed without response, people unconsciously escalate their behavior. This is not because they intend harm, but because the psyche calibrates itself based on feedback. When there is no resistance, the ego assumes approval. Over time, what was once unthinkable becomes normal. The man who once listened attentively now interrupts. The man who once reassured now withdraws. The man who once showed up now assumes presence is guaranteed. The most dangerous part of this pattern is how invisible it feels while it is happening. Nothing seems overtly wrong. There is no obvious villain. The relationship still exists. The person is still there. This creates the illusion of safety. But beneath the surface, something vital is decaying. Tolerance is not an endless resource. It is a reservoir. Each dismissal, each unmet need, each unacknowledged effort drains it slowly. And the ego, blinded by its own comfort, never checks the level. The one who tolerates often hopes for self-correction. They believe that awareness will arrive on its own, that empathy will eventually awaken without confrontation. They wait because they value peace, or because they remember how things used to be. This waiting is often misunderstood as weakness, when in truth, it is an act of restraint. But restraint without recognition turns into exhaustion, and exhaustion eventually becomes detachment. When detachment begins, the ego misreads it again. It assumes distance means stability, that silence means resolution. But silence is often the final language of someone who has stopped trying to be heard. By the time words disappear, the decision has already been made internally. Many people leave emotionally long before they leave physically. And when the departure finally happens, it feels sudden only to the one who was not paying attention. Studies on relationship breakdowns consistently show that emotional neglect is a stronger predictor of separation than conflict. Conflict at least acknowledges presence. Neglect erases it. The ego prefers neglect because it requires no effort, no accountability, no inner work. But neglect carries a hidden cost. It slowly destroys the foundation of respect. And without respect, love cannot survive, no matter how deep it once was. Only after loss does the ego collapse inward. The illusion of strength shatters. The man looks back and sees tolerance for what it truly was, a gift, not a guarantee. He realizes that patience was not weakness, but discipline, that forgiveness was not submission, but choice, that staying was not dependence, but loyalty freely given. This realization is painful because it exposes not only what was lost, but who he was while it was being lost. Yet this moment of recognition, though born from regret, carries the seed of transformation. The ego, when confronted, can either harden or evolve. If it chooses to evolve, it learns a crucial truth. Strength is not measured by how much one can take, but by how consciously one treats what is given. Respect is not maintained by dominance, but by awareness. And tolerance, when mistaken for weakness, becomes the silent threshold where love decides whether to stay or leave. To understand this is to be given a second chance, not to recover what is gone, but to prevent the same blindness from repeating. The ego does not need to be destroyed, it needs to be educated. It must learn that patience deserves reverence, not exploitation, and that those who stay do so not because they cannot leave, but because they choose to. And choice, when honored, sustains connection. When taken for granted, it disappears. Value is rarely understood in the moment of possession. The human mind is oriented toward what is present, not toward what could be lost. While something remains within reach, the psyche treats it as part of the landscape of life, not as a miracle of chance or choice. It is only when absence enters that perception sharpens, when what once filled the space of daily existence leaves behind a silence so loud it forces awareness. Absence becomes the mirror in which true value finally reveals itself. While something is there, the mind negotiates with comfort. It tells itself that tomorrow will offer another chance, another conversation, another expression of care. Time feels abundant when presence is assumed. Words are postponed. Gratitude is delayed. Attention drifts elsewhere. The psyche believes it can return later to what matters. But later is an illusion the mind creates to avoid the discomfort of being fully present now. When absence arrives, that illusion collapses. Loss strips away distraction. Suddenly, the smallest details rise into consciousness with haunting clarity. A voice once ignored becomes unforgettable. A habit once considered ordinary becomes irreplaceable. A presence once blended into routine now feels like the very structure that held life together. This is not imagination romanticizing the past. It is perception finally free from familiarity. Neuroscience shows that the brain encodes emotional memory more deeply after loss, which is why memories intensify rather than fade. Absence does not erase value, it magnifies it. There are countless stories of people who realize too late how much someone mattered. A man remembers how someone believed in him when he doubted himself, how they noticed changes in his mood, how they stayed when he withdrew. While they were there, these actions felt natural, almost expected. In absence, they reveal themselves as rare. Research on human attachment shows that consistent emotional support is one of the strongest predictors of psychological resilience. Yet it is also one of the least consciously appreciated forms of care because it operates quietly, without demand. The pain of absence comes not only from missing the person, but from confronting one's own blindness. Regret is born when awareness arrives after opportunity has passed. The mind replays moments where attention could have been given, words could have been spoken, presence could have been deepened. This reflection is painful because it exposes the gap between what was available and what was acknowledged. The suffering is not just about losing someone, but about realizing how little one truly saw while they were there. Absence also dismantles the ego's illusions. While presence existed, the ego believed it was sufficient, even central. It assumed that connection would endure without effort, that meaning would sustain itself. Loss proves otherwise. It reveals that relationships are not self-maintaining systems, but living exchanges that require consciousness. The ego resists this truth because it demands humility, the admission that value must be recognized actively, not passively assumed. Many people mistake this realization as weakness or sentimentality, but it is actually a form of awakening. In psychological terms, loss forces individuation, the process by which a person becomes aware of their inner patterns, projections, and unconscious assumptions. Absence turns the outer world into an inner teacher. It shows where attention was misplaced and where emotional investment was taken for granted. This knowledge, though painful, is transformative. Data from studies on life regrets consistently show that people regret inaction more than action, especially in relationships. They regret not expressing love, not listening deeply, not being present when it mattered. These regrets surface most strongly after loss because absence removes the possibility of correction. The door that once stood open is suddenly closed, and the mind is left to wander through memories, measuring what was against what could been. Yet absence does not only punish, it instructs. It teaches that value is not inherent in possession, but in perception. What we notice shapes what we cherish. What we cherish shapes how we behave, and how we behave determines whether something remains in our lives or fades away. The lesson is harsh because it arrives late, but it is also precise. It reveals that love, respect, and connection live or die by awareness. The tragedy is not that value is recognized through absence. The tragedy is living in a way that requires absence to learn what matters. Awareness practiced in the present prevents regret in the future. It asks for attention before loss, gratitude before silence, presence before memory. Those who learn to see while things are still near do not need absence to teach them their worth. They understand that what feels ordinary is often extraordinary in disguise, and that what is quietly constant is often what holds life together. Absence speaks in a language the psyche cannot ignore. It says this mattered. It says you were shaped by this more than you knew. And once heard, that message cannot be forgotten. The only question is whether it will remain a source of regret or become the foundation of a deeper, more conscious way of living. Self-reflection often arrives like an unwelcome visitor, knocking only after the damage has been done. While life is moving smoothly, the mind resists looking inward. It prefers momentum over meaning, certainty over questioning. Reflection threatens the ego because it exposes contradictions between who we believe we are and how we actually behave. So it is postponed, it is avoided, and by the time it finally appears, it usually does so in the aftermath of loss, when something meaningful can no longer be repaired. When a relationship ends or a bond fractures, the outer noise falls silent. What remains is the self, alone with memory. This is when reflection becomes unavoidable. The mind begins to replay conversations, decisions, moments of absence. At first, it searches for external reasons, timing, circumstance, the other person's flaws. But slowly, if honesty is allowed, the focus turns inward. Patterns emerge. Avoidance reveals itself. Emotional shortcuts become visible. This is painful not because the truth is cruel, but because it is clear. Many people believe that if reflection had come earlier, everything could have been saved. Sometimes that is true. Often, it is not. Some losses are irreversible. Words unsaid cannot be retroactively spoken. Presence withheld cannot be reclaimed. Repair requires timing, and timing cannot be reversed. This is where despair can take hold. The mind fixates on what should have been done differently, and guilt begins to harden into self-punishment. Yet reflection is not meant to restore the past. Its deeper purpose is to transform the future. Growth begins where repair ends. When the mind finally turns inward, it is being invited to integrate what was unconscious. Psychological growth does not come from avoiding mistakes, but from understanding them. Reflection reveals not just isolated errors, but underlying structures of behavior. It shows how fear disguised itself as indifference, how pride masked insecurity, how silence replaced vulnerability. In moments of loss, people often discover parts of themselves they never examined before. They see how they avoided emotional risk, how they assumed others would adapt, how they delayed honesty until it was no longer useful. This discovery can feel humiliating, but it is also liberating. What is seen can be changed. What remains unconscious continues to repeat itself. Reflection interrupts repetition. It breaks cycles that would otherwise recreate the same pain in different forms. Research on post-traumatic growth shows that individuals who engage in deep self-reflection after significant loss often develop greater empathy, emotional regulation, and clarity of values. Pain forces attention. It strips away distractions and exposes what truly matters. In this sense, loss becomes a catalyst rather than an ending. The psyche reorganizes itself around new insights. Priorities shift. Superficial concerns lose their grip. What once seemed important fades, and what was ignored comes into focus. The danger lies not in reflecting too late, but in stopping at regret. Regret without insight leads to stagnation. Insight without action leads to repetition. Growth requires both. It demands that reflection be honest and compassionate. Honest enough to acknowledge responsibility, compassionate enough to avoid self-destruction. The goal is not to condemn the past self, but to understand it. The person you were acted with the awareness you had at the time. Reflection expands awareness. It does not rewrite history. As growth unfolds, a subtle change occurs. The pain of loss remains, but it no longer defines the self. Instead, it informs it. The individual becomes more attentive, more present, more willing to engage with discomfort before it becomes destructive. They learn to listen not just to others, but to their own inner signals. Discontent is no longer ignored. Tension is addressed early. Emotional truth is spoken sooner, even when it feels risky. Many people never reach this stage because reflection frightens them. It demands accountability without the comfort of repair. But those who accept this challenge emerge with a deeper sense of integrity. They stop seeking to undo the past and start committing to a more conscious way of being. Growth becomes an act of responsibility, a promise that the same blindness will not be repeated. Self-reflection coming too late for repair is not a failure of character. It is a human pattern. What matters is what follows. When reflection is embraced rather than resisted, it transforms pain into wisdom. It ensures that while the past cannot be changed, the future will not be shaped by the same unconscious forces. In this way, loss does not end the story. It becomes the moment where awareness finally takes root and growth begins. Awareness is not something that comes easily, nor is it something that can be commanded into existence. It is subtle, patient, and often uncomfortable, because it forces us to confront what we have ignored, denied, or taken for granted. Most people move through life assuming continuity, that the patterns of today will persist into tomorrow, that relationships, opportunities, and affections are permanent. The mind prefers this assumption because it avoids responsibility. It avoids scrutiny. Yet it is this very avoidance that traps us in repetitive cycles of regret, pain, and missed opportunity. Awareness is the only way to break the cycle, because without it, everything repeats, endlessly disguised as familiarity, habit, or circumstance. To be aware is to see beyond the immediate, to perceive the hidden currents of behavior and choice that shape our lives. It is to notice the small signs that indicate imbalance, a partner withdrawing slightly, a friend no longer sharing their strew gels, a parent offering advice that goes unheard. In the noise of everyday life, these signals can seem trivial, unworthy of attention, but they are the first indicators of deeper truths. Ignoring them allows patterns to solidify. Noticing them allows change to begin. The moment of awareness is often quiet, almost imperceptible, yet it carries a force powerful enough to redirect the trajectory of a life. The cycle of neglect, regret, and reconciliation often begins unconsciously. A man assumes he has time, that he can postpone gratitude, that care will always be present without acknowledgement. He interprets tolerance for permanence, forgiveness for obligation, patience for weakness. As each day passes, small omissions accumulate, missed opportunities to speak, to listen, to show appreciation. Over months or years, these omissions become habits, and habits become patterns, until the very foundation of connection erodes without notice. By the time realization arrives, the consequences are visible, tangible, often irreversible. Awareness, if cultivated early, interrupts this process. It brings the unconscious to light before it hardens into loss. Awareness requires courage because it is not always comfortable. It exposes the ego, showing where pride, complacency, or self-interest has interfered with genuine connection. It challenges assumptions that love is unconditional without attention, that loyalty is a guarantee, that presence alone is sufficient. Psychological studies consistently demonstrate that mindfulness and conscious attention improve relationships and emotional intelligence. The simple act of noticing, actively listening, appreciating, acknowledging, reverses the patterns of neglect before they calcify. Awareness transforms automatic behavior into intentional action. And in that transformation lies the power to break the cycle. It is often through loss that awareness becomes unavoidable, but waiting for loss is not necessary. People can cultivate awareness in ordinary life by reflecting on the value of what is present, by questioning the assumptions of permanence, by observing their own habits and tendencies without judgment. Awareness is not passive. It requires active engagement with the present moment and the willingness to acknowledge one's responsibility in every relationship. The man who waits for absence to reveal what mattered is caught in a reactive state, but the man who observes, who listens, who chooses consciously, steps into a proactive one. He intervenes in the cycle before repetition can claim him. There is a profound emotional component to this process. Awareness deepens empathy. not on L. If for others but for oneself. It allows a person to recognize the ways they have relied on the constancy of others rather than contributing consciously to the stability of connection. It reveals the hidden costs of neglect, the frustration, the hurt, the unspoken longing of those who give consistently. Awareness is a mirror that shows both the gift of presence and the harm of absence, and it insists that the observer act with integrity. Without this insight, cycles repeat endlessly. Neglect invites withdrawal, withdrawal invites resentment, and resentment invites eventual loss. History and daily life offer countless examples of this principle. A parent assumes children will always forgive minor absences or lapses in attention. A partner assumes the other will endure repeated inattentions. A friend assumes loyalty will persist regardless of effort. When these assumptions fail, the aftermath is predictable: regret, remorse, and the recognition that something deeply valuable was misunderstood or overlooked. Awareness, had it been present, would have prevented this chain. Awareness intervenes in real time, offering clarity before habits calcify and before love is taken for granted. Breaking the cycle requires consistent practice. It requires asking difficult questions. Am I present? Am I listening? Am I noticing what is given freely? Am I contributing to the growth and well-being of those I care about? Or am I relying on their tolerance to sustain the connection? The answers are often uncomfortable because they reveal complacency, unconscious selfishness, and the illusions of permanence. But discomfort is the price of freedom from repetition. Each moment of acknowledgement, each conscious choice to engage deeply, interrupts the unconscious pattern and establishes a new trajectory. Ultimately, awareness is the bridge between unconscious repetition and conscious living. It transforms routine into attention, habit into choice, presence into meaningful participation. It allows a person to recognize the fragility and value of what is near before absence makes it painfully visible. Awareness is not a single act. It is a continual cultivation, a lifelong practice of noticing, reflecting, and responding with intention. It is the antidote to regret, the pathway to deeper connection, and the only way to break the cycles that define so much of human suffering. To live without awareness is to be caught in the orbit of repetition, while to live with it is to step into freedom, clarity, and the power to honor what truly matters while it is still within reach. The lesson is clear. Life does not wait for recognition, and love does not endure without conscious care. Awareness is not just a tool, it is a responsibility. It allows us to see what we have before it is gone, to honor what is given before it is lost, and to act with intention before patterns of neglect take root. While we cannot undo the past, we can transform the future by choosing presence, gratitude, and attentiveness today. Breaking the cycle begins within, and through awareness, we ensure that what truly matters is never taken for granted again.